Hi, welcome to our session on academic writing for us here in Africa. And today I want to talk about writing clearly, composing your academic article. My name is Kiama Mugambi and I'm the editorial manager at Africa Theological Network Press. And our goal is to publish books by Africans for Africa with a African publishing agenda and to make the material available on the continent, all over the continent and beyond. And I'm going to be talking in my capacity as an editorial manager, working in publishing, and so these are some of the things that we would want to see in a publishing house, but also as someone who works with graduate students and teaches and who reads lots of papers from them and who has a passion to see graduate students publish their work, but also as one who has colleagues and has been involved in academic writing at various levels from articles to books, journal articles and so on. And I want to be sharing from all these experiences and just combining this. So my hope at the end of this session is that you'll be able to see the connection between our orality, as Africans, we are an oral people, to see the connection between our orality and our academic writing and to see what we can learn out of that. My hope is also that you can be able to learn the elements of an academic piece and how to combine those elements so that you can have a good academic piece that is publishable anywhere in the world, not just here in Africa, not just with ATNP. And in the process, my hope is that you will also be able to see what are some of the common errors that we make, in our academic writing. So let's jump into it. So my premise is that you already have knowledge. You already know. There are wonderful, I've met wonderful students who are very astute, who have something powerful to share in terms of knowledge in the various disciplines. My discipline is world Christianity. My field of study is world Christianity, and I've seen wonderful scholars who have something valuable to say. And like any scholar, it's always good for you to refine your knowledge and to keep honing your craft, to keep honing your skill. But the challenge always is, how do we clearly communicate the material? Whether you are a scholar here on the continent or a scholar, an African scholar in the diaspora. Our biggest strength is also possibly our biggest drawback, biggest possible drawback, and that is orality. We talk, communication. Oral communication is an important part of who we are, an important part of our identity. It is also an important part of our epistemology, how we process knowledge, how we share knowledge, how we interact with knowledge. And unfortunately, we often write like we talk. And talking, as I'll say shortly, talking and academic writing have two different functions. And so, oftentimes we'll write like we talk, and the way we talk, we pick ideas, we drop them randomly, we in our talking, in the course of our interacting with the other person, we let the argument construct itself in the middle of all of that. And sometimes the argument constructs itself with what we say, or what we say using sayings, using proverbs, sometimes what we leave unsaid. That's an oral way of communicating, and we we already know how to do that, and we know how to listen to that. And different parts of Africa, we have different ways of doing that, and oftentimes they will leave out the argument until the end, and then as the some of the Westerners would say, then we'll pull the rabbit out of the hat, then we'll have a surprise element in terms of our argument. But oral conversation is relational. We talk, the way we use our words in terms of our conversation is relational. But academic writing functions differently. Yes, it has a kind of relationship, but it functions differently because it is a systematic communication of valuable knowledge in writing. And so let's talk a little bit about that systematic communication. Let's talk about the parts, the elements. And I'm going to share the essential elements of an academic piece. And the idea here is to show that it is there is a systematic way it is done. I am not going to give hard and fast rules of how you must write each sentence in this, because that's where your creativity comes in. And that's where you combine your creativity and the body of knowledge and the rules of your particular discipline. So I know I'll be talking to historians, political scientists, people in the different disciplines. So every discipline has a way in which the knowledge, the different kinds of data and so on. But I want to talk about the essential elements of the piece and talk about it in general terms, and hope that you can pick that and combine that with your creativity and with the codes or the rules or the conventions of your particular discipline, your particular field of study, and you can use those to write wonderful pieces. Every academic piece has an introduction, and there are different ways people work with introductions, but ultimately a good introduction gives you the lay of the land. It gives you little pieces about the background, about why this is important, about your argument. It sort of opens us out, opens the door for us to try and understand where are you going with this thing. Gives us all the salient points. Sometimes in the introduction you'll even give a little bit, a hint of where what the next step is. But basically the introduction gives you a roadmap into your article. And then after that, then you give the background. And in a piece for grading, in a thesis or a term paper that you give, the background of the review is to show the teacher that you have an understanding of what you're talking about, or that you've read all the important sources to be able to answer the question. But in an academic article, that is important, but it's not as important as the fact that your background or your review, usually the literature review, the background, the way you set up the particular article, the most important thing, even more important than showing that you've read all the books that are there to be read, or to show that you are, you have touched all the main things. In your academic article, when you're writing for publishing, what you want to show more than anything else is that you have a grasp of the key arguments around which you want to speak, your argument to speak into. And so it's really not about the number, but it's really about how does those articles, does the review and the background that you give relate to what you want to say? And what is it that you want to say? That you have an argument, you have some claims that you want to make, you have some valuable claims, and we'll talk about that in a moment. You have something useful that you want to contribute to your audience that will change their way of thinking about a particular issue, or that will add value to them and to the field. So that's your argument, and so you want to have an element in there that feeds into the argument, and you make your claim, and every claim that you make needs to be supported with some evidence, and the evidence with the evidence you need to point out why that evidence is important for your argument. You need to demonstrate the limits, or to qualify your argument, the bounds within which your argument holds. So your argument is supported by your evidence, the data. In different fields, it's different kinds of data. In historical pieces, then your data is sources of history, primary sources of history, usually secondary sources of history. Usually, your background might be tertiary sources, that is, people who have themselves processed knowledge and gone to the primary sources and possibly secondary sources, and they have processed all of that to build their own arguments. But your data really should be primary sources, maybe secondary sources as well. And so your data cannot stand by itself. You need to relate your data to your argument, and that is where you have your analysis. And you at that point you look at your data and you open it up for your audience, and help them see how your data relates to your argument, what it says, what it doesn't say, what you agree with, and how that directs you there. A useful part of the analysis is the contextual engagement. Analysis can be dry. The data can be dry, and I've made these mistakes before, where I just looked at my data and made an analysis, and this actually came out very clearly for me in my own PhD writing. But it in one version, in my earliest drafts, there wasn't any contextual engagement, and so data and analysis is hard to read, and it's hard to see, okay, so why is this important? How does this relate to what you're trying to do? So contextual engagement, and I'm going to be saying that again in a moment, but your contextual engagement, that's where your creativity comes in, that's where your observations come in, that's where your metaphors can come in, that's, and you want to mix that in creatively with what you're doing, and then you bring it all together, in the concluding remarks, or somehow at the end of your analysis and your contextual engagement, then you can then paint the whole picture of your argument, and tell us what you've been trying to tell us with your data, with your background, with your analysis, and with the different lines that you connect the data analysis with your argument. So you bring it all together. And then in most academic pieces, then once you bring together your argument, there's something at the end there that moves us to the next place. What are the implications of your argument, for example? What are the what's the next step? What do you recommend for further study? What is missing in this that now needs someone else or your own work to investigate? And the what next varies from different kinds of fields. Different fields of study have different ways of concluding their own academic pieces. If this is a chapter, then at the end, if it's a chapter of your book, then at the end you point the reader now to the next chapter. So your academic piece needs some sort of a roadmap, and right now I'm talking about putting together your draft, because you have some thoughts, you have your data, you have all of this, you've written it out. Now you're constructing, you're building your piece for publication. And so the first element, and this comes after you've done your your research, and you've somehow written it down. So the next thing that you do is you create a blueprint for the reader, and that usually is the introduction. That blueprint is what the reader will use to, in a sense, you know, get a picture of what you're trying to do. And so that's, I'm calling it the blueprint. It's the blueprint. It's like the architect's blueprint of your house if you're going to build a house. And so it's your plan. This is how we're going to go. And you have, it usually will be, paragraph, a couple of paragraphs. If it is a long chapter, it's a number of paragraphs. It's a book, then it's a whole chapter. Your introduction is a whole chapter where you lay the groundwork. And so that's the first, that's the first thing. So you have the blueprint, the intro, and then after that, you lay the ground. You prepare the ground for your foundation. That's where you put your background. That's where you put your review. That's where you put the main arguments. One main argument that you want your own argument to speak into, or the two main arguments, or the background, the context of your article. And then it is on top of that you then now build your argument, or the idea that you're presenting to your readers, the valuable knowledge stated in the form of a claim that you are making. This is what you are saying. And it is on that foundational idea that then you build, you build your house. That's where you put in your you build in your data, and your data. There are different kinds of data. It could be numeric data. It could be archival data. It could be interviews. It could be observations. It could be thick descriptions. That's your data. But your data cannot stand by itself. Your data is going to need analysis. You look into the data. You look at the patterns. You look at how that data relates to your argument, how that data supports your argument, how that data supports your claims. In what ways doesn't it support? So in what ways does it support partially? And you use that. The analysis section is what then helps your data to speak into your argument. And let me say, like I said a little earlier, is that mistake number one of the mistakes that I've made myself and I have seen in some articles is that this is where the article ends. And someone has put together an article. You've probably given an introduction of some sort, and you've written you've given your background, you've given your key idea, and then you present your data, and then you do the analysis, and then you leave it there. And you haven't connected it to the real world. You haven't connected your reader to what the ways in which they can relate to it. And sometimes that will produce a very dry academic article that is difficult to read and difficult to relate to. And so that's one mistake. It's a mistake that I've made, and it's a mistake I see many people making in their own writing. I'll talk about a second mistake in this next slide, and that is when you put in beyond your analysis, you connect the data through analysis to the context, but then you don't bring us back. You don't bring it all together for us in terms of taking us back to where how all this connects to the argument. So that's the second mistake. So when you're writing, you need your introduction, you need to lay the groundwork, you need to put present your key argument, the idea that you're trying to present, the claim that you're making, support it with evidence, your data, analyze that data and connect it to the context that you're talking about, whether it's political science, you want to relate it to a context. If you're talking about Africa, you're talking about your specific country. Relate your data, relate your analysis to this, and you can use your creativity here. You can use your stories here. You can use your metaphors here. You can use your sayings. You can use your anecdotes here, and use them to bring your clarity. Now, without the contextual engagement, it becomes something like a building without windows. It's all analysis, no entry point, no entry of light. But when you engage with the context, you build, and then you come back to the idea, then at that point, it all sort of comes together. And then after that, finish off the house, finish off your article by giving the next step. So that's the piece. That's how the piece stands together. Again, notice I'm not telling you this is the way you write your introduction, or this is what you have to include in the background. Different disciplines have different things that you need to put in the background. The arguments, the claims, again, different disciplines, different fields have different ways in which the claims are made and how they are supported with data. But there are some things to note in terms of what a good argument is, and we'll do that in another video. But for now, this is how you compose your academic article. This is how you build it. This is how you put it together. I want to talk about some mistakes that people will make, and another common error that people will make is for you to start your article with a background without giving people a roadmap, without giving people a blueprint of what you're trying to do. And so right off the bat, you start with a background and present your reader with the background. Then you give them, you connect that background, maybe the review or what you've written, and connect it with the context. But we don't know yet what you're trying to do. You haven't given us a roadmap. You haven't given us some way of making sense of what you're going to say thereafter. And then once you do that, you give us the data, and then analyze it. And some people will end the article there. And essentially what you've done over here is you've constructed your article in perhaps in the way that we tend to talk, where you give a background, you give your stories or your sayings and things, and you talk, and it's as if you're trying to build a relationship and expect your readers to fill in the gaps. Then after that, you will conclude with the argument, because you've hidden it behind the same way you would in a conversation, and pulled the idea out, and voila, this is what I have. And then after that, quickly conclude your piece and give people the next step. As you can see, it's an incomplete house. We don't have a plan. It was just built just the way sometimes people build things in some places where that you and I have been. It doesn't have a foundation. It doesn't have something to stand on. It has just sort of been built in the air. And it makes for very difficult reading. Once I presented something to something to someone to read that I had written, and it really was baffling for him. He looked at it and he couldn't see how on what the whole thing stood and how what direction it was taking. So those are common errors that people will make when we write articles. Over here, I want to just bring it together now by saying that when you're writing and you're constructing your article's argument, when you're composing your article, I want to encourage you. Avoid incomplete articles without an introduction or missing your argument. Try and compose your article in a way that is systematic, including all the elements. And it will help for you to use the order that I have given, but you don't have to be tied to it. I will say though that your article will need an introduction, it will need a conclusion, and the body within then can be dictated by the conventions of your particular area of research and study. Now, someone will come and say, well, yeah, but that's not African. It's not an African way of doing it. And I'm going to say, yes, this is the product of a long history of scholastic writing. But I will say, though, that in whichever particular discipline that you get into, I think it is good to be innovative, but some innovation obscures your own writing. It will make your article unclear. And in the way that you write, if you write using the idiom of your people, in Africa we have 1,000 different people groups. Each one of them is unique. Each one of them has its own way of presenting and interacting with knowledge, its own epistemology. It will not be helpful for you to assume that your readers can engage with the articles from your perspective. And so you can help your readers by using some of these conventions and being creative about it. Yes, you can use your own metaphors, you can use your own sayings, which sometimes can really illuminate what you want to say. But above all, be clear. Think like an African. You can talk like one, dress like one, but whatever you do, write clearly for everybody on the continent to be able to hear you clearly. And then, thirdly, I want to say that in your contextual engagement, like I've said, be creative. Use your stories, use your proverbs, use your metaphors, give your anecdotes, paint for us a picture of your world, tell your story creatively, and allow us to be able to engage with the content, but also with who you are. That I think is the beauty of writers from this continent. I think we have something to say, and you have something to say, but you need to say it clearly. So, just to go back again, we've talked about the orality, the impact of orality on our writing, and we've talked about how we can construct or compose our article, our academic article, by giving up a good introduction, which is a roadmap, by laying the groundwork, giving an argument, and presenting our claims, and then presenting our evidence for it, our data, analyzing it, connecting it with the context, revisiting the argument and directing as to where else you would like us to go. We've talked about some of the errors. I want to leave you with some resources as I come to a conclusion. One of the most useful resources for me when I wrote my master's was Booth, Column, and Williams, The Craft of Research. An amazing book. The edition that I had was the second edition. They have much more recent editions now. Find that book. That book really helps lay the groundwork and breaks down the elements of academic writing, and I found it very useful for my studies, and still visit the still revisit the book for my own academic writing. The other book is an old book, How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren. It's the title is a little misleading. I grew up in an academic home. My dad was an academic, and he had this book, How to Read a Book. And I always wondered to myself, I mean, you read so many books. Why would you want to get a book that teaches you how to read a book? But having read it, I didn't read it in my undergraduate course. I should have. And if you're an undergraduate student listening to this, find that book and read it. It gives you, it not only does it help you learn how to read and how to read well, how to get the most out of a book, I think it also, in learning about how to read a book, it allows you insights into how you could write well. And then finally, I would want to direct you to our website. If you would, go to our website, atnpress.com. We have resources for academic writers. We have a number of videos there, some which we have made ourselves, but some that we have found from other websites that can be very helpful for you as you think about writing. There are also resources in there for editing, because it's not enough just to write. You need to go back to your own work and edit it and prepare it and make it good for consumption by your audience. So thank you. My hope, my prayer and hope for you is that this has been helpful, and that it will allow you to become a better writer, and that you'll be able to publish pieces. Thank you.